Welcome into the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Molesky and Jim Leitner here with you Monday, February 10th. And rare that we're talking on the eve of a game here on a Monday night, but the Fighting Saints will play tomorrow in Waterloo, so we'll touch on that game and then the rest of their weekend as well in a little bit. But first we have to go back to last weekend, and the Fighting Saints, a 4-1 victory on Friday night that wasn't as dominant as maybe the score suggested, but then 6-0 as dominant as that score suggested on Saturday night. And all things told, again, it's 4 points in the standings. They continue to roll 4 in a row now for the Fighting Saints, 6 in a row at home. And this team is starting to get back to what we saw before the winter break in terms of every single weekend. It feels like they're winning and they're dominating.
No question about it. You come out of the Christmas break and you have a really difficult schedule. They kind of hit a little bit of a stumbling block, but I think that might end up actually helping them because it maybe exposed a few weaknesses, and they've worked on those since then, and they've been, a dynamic team, the last, couple weekends, and it's exciting to see that. You want to win as many hockey games as you can, but sometimes you stumble a little bit, and you realize that you're not perfect, and in the USHL, you're never going to be perfect, no matter who you are. So I think it's been, a good last couple weeks after, like you said, kind of a little bit of a stumble after the Christmas break.
And always good to defend home ice, which they did a 4-game homestand, and 4-0 on the 4-game homestand. You can't get much better than that. But every single performance in the homestand, it was a multi-goal victory. It was a 3+ goal victory every single night. And I think that showcased, this entire 2-weekend stretch showcased how far the offense has come, how much better they are now than they were day one of the regular season, and how big of a factor the defense continues to be, because they didn't even need to score 4+ goals in every single game. They could have scored 2 or 3 goals in some of those games and still won, but when everything's clicking, they're as dangerous as it gets.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about all these multi-goal wins, because for the last 3 years it seems like every game was a 1-goal game. Either you win or you lose by 1 goal, which speaks to how tight the USHL is. But you're right. I think they're putting all 3 elements together. They're getting great goaltending, goaltenders making big saves when they really need to. The defense has been lights out all season, leading the USHL with, really consistent. I don't know if they've had a bad performance, or, maybe a couple games here and there where they've given up, 4 or 5 goals. But other than that, the defense has been really good, and the forwards have done a nice job of not only putting up points on the board, but getting back and helping defensively. I think that might be one of the biggest keys to the defense is, you see a guy, go down and make a rush, it doesn't work out for them, and then they're hustling back on defense and breaking up an odd man rush. Mm-hmm. We saw that with Reese Gaber this weekend when he was shorthanded. Had a great shorthanded opportunity. It didn't go in the back of the net, and he was hustling back, and he broke up a play on the other end. So, I mean, you get clicking on all cylinders like that. It's a lot of fun to watch, and that is a really good explanation why they're winning these games by more than a goal.
And this was the first 2 games of the season for Dubuque against Youngstown. They'll face them twice more in March when they go to Youngstown towards the middle of that month. But when we looked at the Phantoms on paper, it was a team that gave up a lot of goals, and without Trevor Kuntar didn't score much. And that's kind of what we saw this weekend, a team that gave up 10 goals and only scored 1 goal, and Trevor Kuntar was kept off the board the entire weekend. And actually watching them play in person, it's one of those teams that the stats, I think, tell a pretty solid story. I don't think they're deceiving much of any way, and part of that, I'm sure, is going up against the best defense in the USHL. But part of that is, and we saw it, if Kuntar is not going, the offense has a lot of trouble going as well.
No doubt about it. There's a big separation between him and is Cassidy, mm-hmm. their number 2 scorer. So you get into a situation if you're Dubuque, and I think we saw that all weekend, where every time he was on the ice, he was feeling uncomfortable, where the Fighting Saints were in his face, or they were trying to lay a big hit on him, or just really completely aware of him every time he was on the ice. And you take away a big weapon like that, you're going to have a lot of success. And I think the other aspect of that too is, when a guy like Kuntar is shut down, that's a guy that Youngstown really relies on. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the guys around him start thinking, well, geez, what do I have to do to pick up the slack and maybe they start trying to do a little bit too much or try doing more than they're really capable of doing. And, same with Kuntar. I think maybe there are times when he tries to do a little bit too much, because he's so relied on for their offense. And, it's never a good recipe. And, I think that's one of the nice aspects of the Fighting Saints is you don't have to rely on Reese Gaber every time. You don't have to rely on Ty Jackson every time or Dylan Jackson or anybody. It seems like every weekend there's a different line that's really picking up the slack and, carrying the bulk of the load. So it's got to be tough for Youngstown not to have that scoring depth like Dubuque has.
And you mentioned the scoring depth and the line stepping up. Last weekend it was Glenn, Cherametta, and Venuto, the line that was dominant for the Fighting Saints. This weekend it was partly Reese Gaber, but it was Gaber, Halliday, and Beck. And that line was put together about a month or so ago from head coach Oliver David, and it's kind of clicked and stuck for the last month. I think this is, for the first time in a long time, this is the longest stretch that we've seen line after line after line staying the same for head coach Oliver David. And not that the switches beforehand didn't work, it's just now you've seen consistent 6-7 goal outputs, it seems, for almost a month straight with the players that they have. But Gaber had 5 points this weekend, Stephen Halliday had 4 points, Ryan Beck a highlight reel goal, and then 2 primary assists to really break the game open on Friday night. So that was the line now this weekend that decided to step up and carry the load.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You have the Jackson line, they can carry the load. The Halliday line carried the load this weekend. The Cherametta line was the weekend before, and this week. And then I don't want to forget about the fourth line. Tommy Middleton had a couple goals this weekend. A couple real nice goals too, and they're contributing as well. So I don't know that there are too many teams around the USHL that can go 4 lines deep and 3 good solid scoring lines deep, and it's a nice luxury because you mentioned the changing up of the lines. If you get to a point where teams get a good pre-scout on you and they can, figure out what you're going to do and, take away that element, even in game, you can make some adjustments and guys are comfortable enough with each other that they can go out and perform and throw a different wrinkle at their opponent. And it's such a nice luxury to have. And it's a lot of fun to watch too.
And we talked about it a little bit on the broadcast, but Reese Gaber, 3 goals this weekend. That was a battle that we were looking forward to, Trevor Kuntar and Reese Gaber. And Gaber's created for the first time all season a little bit of separation between himself and the rest of the USHL in terms of the scoring race, for at least on the goal side of things. He has 27, Kuntar has 23. But now we're starting to talk about all-time records for Reese Gaber. 1 more goal, he gets 50 in his USHL career, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. He would only be the 3rd Fighting Saint to reach that mark. He needs 6 career goals to tie the overall record in Tier 1 history for the Fighting Saints, held by Seamus Malone. And you mentioned that Seamus did it in 3 seasons. Reese is only in his 2nd season. And Reese Gaber is, and I don't know this off the top of my head, I'd have to do quick math, but he's less than 10 points away from 100 in his career. And the Jackson twins, I believe, are both 12 points away from 100 in their career. So we have a lot of milestones coming up, and it really shows how big that 2nd year is, because they all had fantastic first years, and they're all blowing those first years out of the water here in year 2.
Yeah, Seamus, he was here 3 years, but he came here, I believe, as a 16-year-old, so a little more difficult to do that, and Reese has been a little bit older, but you're exactly right about that 2nd year of development, and there was a lot of talk about Reese Gaber going to the University of North Dakota this year. There was talk about the Jacksons going to Northeastern for this season, and it seemed like all last season they were like, well, maybe they're going to stay, and maybe they're going to come back, maybe they're going to go. They were really kind of on the fence, but what a brilliant idea to come back and get that 2nd year of development in the USHL. Now they're not just they're going to go into college as impact players or potential impact players, and it's such a benefit to have that. Because I think if you go to college maybe a year too early, you're not an impact player right away. Maybe you sit a little bit on the bench, or you don't get as much ice time as you probably would like, and then you're in a situation. Well, is this going to work out? Do I need to go somewhere else? But I think by staying that extra year, you're developing, and you're putting yourself in a position where you can be an impact player right away. And, it really solidifies your future as well. So I think it's just a brilliant move by by all three of those guys to do that. And, I think it's not a coincidence that the best players in the USHL are usually in their second year.
Yeah, I think it's rare to have a jump like this because we've talked about jumps. It's a big jump from USHL to NCAA. It's a big jump from the NCAA to whether it's ECHL or the AHL, and then that jump to the NHL is obviously the biggest one you can make. But even from one junior league to the USHL, it's really cemented itself as one of, if not the premier junior leagues in the entire world. So to make that jump, you see how much more just confidence, I think. I think the physical talent there for Reese Gaber and the Jackson twins, it got better because they got bigger and stronger. But you always see someone move better when they have confidence. We've seen it during the course of this season with Stephen Halliday. He's got some confidence, and now he's producing at well over a point per game clip over his last 20 games, and that's kind of the expectation that people had coming in. But then you forget that Halliday's not even 18 years old yet.
Exactly.
I mean, he's still one of the youngest players in the league, already having a year before this. So when you have that confidence, you might have the physical ability, but it's not used to its full potential if you're not playing with confidence.
Yeah, and I think the biggest difference between this and other junior leagues is there's such an emphasis on playing defense. Because you are developing these guys for the next level, for the NCAA level, and you have to be well-rounded, complete players to compete at the NCAA level. And the USHL coaches do a wonderful job of putting you in a position where you play defense, where you play a well-rounded game. Mm-hmm. If you come from a junior league where, offense is at a premium and you really don't play a lot of defense, sure, you're going to rack up a lot of points, but you're not going to be as well-rounded. Same with coming from midget. You can be a superstar on your team and, blow everybody away at the midget level or high school level. Then when you come to this level and there's an emphasis on defense, it can be a real struggle. We saw with Reese Gaber and the Jackson twins last year, they had moments where they were dynamic, where they looked like they were ready to go. And then there were moments when teams figured them out a little bit defensively, and it was a lot bigger challenge. And, I think those struggles are really good for players because it really emphasizes what you have to do, how much work you have to do to be ready to go to that next level. And, all three of those guys, they went into the summer knowing exactly what a year in the USHL was like and what they were going to have to do to prepare to have success, and they've had it. And you look at not just the point totals they've all had consistent years, and they've all scored points that really matter. Games that are tight games, scoring the go-ahead goal or scoring the goal that ties the game. There have been a lot of really important points for all three of those guys. And again, you're talking about confidence. It all comes from confidence.
It stems from confidence, and you mentioned those guys, all three of them, and then just everyone, I think, on the Fighting Saints right now is playing with confidence, no reason not to, and that's part of the reason why you get these 6 and 7 goal outputs pretty regularly, because everyone's having fun and playing with confidence, and there's not really a substitute for either of those intangibles. We'll look at the Fighting Saints a little bit more and their opponent or opponents this weekend. Tomorrow night, it's the Waterloo Blackhawks on the road at Young Arena, and then Friday and Saturday, a home-and-home with the Green Bay Gamblers. So the Fighting Saints, a busy week, but a little bit of a separation between these games on the 3-game week. We'll look at that and more on the other side of this break. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Molesky and Jim Leitner this Monday evening, and the Fighting Saints now 4-0 on their homestand will hit the road for the first time in the month of February. They take on the Waterloo Blackhawks for the 3rd time at Young Arena, for the 6th time overall this season, and this is a series that was really even through the first 4 games record-wise. It seemed like the Fighting Saints did have an edge, but it was 2-2. Now it's 3-2 in favor of the Fighting Saints, and the last 2 games have been pretty clinical, dominant performances from Dubuque. Obviously, the 8-2 win in Waterloo, but then they really took care of business here in Dubuque. I thought, all things considered, it might have been the best performance because Waterloo never had a chance to really be in that game. Even in the blowouts in Waterloo, the Blackhawks had some pushes where if they got a couple bounces, it could have been a lot closer. This last performance in Dubuque was probably the best of the season in terms of shutting them down. But now it's a completely different game because you go to that bigger ice surface, and from what we've seen this season, big advantage Fighting Saints.
Well, yeah, it's amazing that you can even say that, because for the last 10 years going over there, you're always going to face a team that skates really well and, understands what it takes to play on that bigger ice surface. But it's always been a tough place for the Fighting Saints to play. But, this season the Saints skate extremely well. They move really well on the bigger ice, and they understand the angles really well, and it's been a smooth transition over to that bigger ice, and they've actually had, like you said, a lot of success. And in the Tier 1 era, Waterloo has only been beaten by 6 goals 2 times since 2001, 2002. They both come this season. They've come in back-to-back games by the Fighting Saints. So I think I think it's safe to say that the Fighting Saints do have an advantage over there, and so I think it's going to be exciting to see if they can continue that advantage this week.
And it's always interesting to have a quick turnaround from the weekend, because both of these teams are coming off of 2-game wins, 2-game sweeps of the same team. Waterloo, a pretty impressive sweep on home ice against the Fargo Force, and the Dubuque Fighting Saints look dominant over the Youngstown Phantoms. And when both teams are rolling, we said this on the broadcast, you want to just continue playing. Well, both of these teams will have a chance to hop back right on the ice on a Tuesday night, and it's a little bit of a different feeling for the players, but I don't think this is necessarily a bad one that throws you out of your routine, because you're just happy to go play in another game.
Yeah, like in the Saints case, they get Sunday off. Today, Monday, they get, just a, quick walk-through practice. Nothing really, maybe just get the blood flowing, get the legs going, and, so nothing real intense. And then you go out and play. I think as a player, you kind of like that feel. You get to a point where, in a season where you're practicing all the time, practice can sometimes get a little monotonous. And, it's nice to throw a curveball in there and have a different look to the week. And I know that Coach Oliver David has put a big emphasis on making sure his guys get the right rest and the right days off from practice. And, this will be a little bit of a change, but I think it's going to be a welcome change. And, it'll be fun to go over to Waterloo. You play in Waterloo, it's a loud building. Their fans are maybe not the most courteous fans in the league. That kind of gets the blood pumping too. So I think if you're going to go play a Tuesday night game, this is one where you're going to get the enthusiasm rolling pretty quickly.
And I don't think, like we said, I don't think the Fighting Saints are going to lack any confidence going in against the Waterloo Blackhawks. And then as we move forward through this week for Dubuque, it's nice to have a 3-game week that doesn't feature a 3-3. Those are always tough to play in, but now you get a couple days separation between the game against Waterloo and the next 2. They'll face Green Bay on Friday here at the Mesquite Community Ice Center, and then Green Bay again on Saturday at the Resch Center in Green Bay. And the last time these 2 teams played, it was a home and home. Just the dates were reversed, where it was on the road on Friday and home on Saturday. That was right before the winter break, and the Fighting Saints won both games. But this is a Gamblers team that's trending in a much better direction than last time they were playing the Fighting Saints. The Gamblers are 6-3-1 in their last 10, and they're up to 4th place in the Eastern Conference. So they have a lot more to play for right now than Dubuque, because Dubuque can afford to have an off week. And it's not saying that they should shoot for that or that it will happen, but they can afford to have an off weekend with the cushion that they've built. Really, anyone else in the Eastern Conference can't, because that's how tight the bottom of their standings are. So Green Bay is definitely going to be hungry, and I expect a much better contest than the last 2 times they played.
Yeah, I think we've been saying this since the beginning of the year. We expected a little bit more out of Green Bay. With the number of veterans the Gamblers have returning, we expected them to be, a little bit better right now they're right around the 500 mark, right at 526 winning percentage. I kind of anticipated, I thought they would be a little bit better than that. Just again, with all the veterans they have, Jesse Tucker, the leading scorer, back, and so I thought they'd be a much better team. And it seems like now that veteran presence is coming into fruition, and they're playing much better hockey. As you mentioned, 6-3-1 in the last 10, so they are trending in the right way. And sometimes that happens with veteran teams. You kind of almost pace yourself a little bit. I think we saw that with the Fighting Saints last season, where they decided to just kind of pace themselves and turn it on at the end. And I think that might be a similar case with the Gamblers. And there's still a lot of time that they can climb up a little bit higher in the standings, but with the rugged start, I think it's going to be tough for them to do that.
And the Green Bay Gamblers are, it looks like I think the highest that they could climb, like you said, might be third. I think they can pass Team USA, especially the way Team USA has been playing. But the biggest thing for them, maybe not in terms of climbing the standings, but creating just more separation between them and the bottom of the Eastern Conference. Right now, Cedar Rapids very much in it, even though they're in 7th. They have 37 points in 39 games played. That's just 4 points fewer than the Gamblers with the same amount of games played. So you just want to give yourself a little bit more breathing room because it's always tough to be fighting for a playoff spot. And we saw it last year with the Fighting Saints. I mean, it's nerve-wracking to be fighting for a playoff spot when you only have 2-3 games left in the season.
Yeah, and that was a little nerve-wracking because, if I recall correctly, the Fighting Saints didn't know they were getting into the playoff. They were kind of safe the last couple weeks of the season, but they kind of took it down to the end in terms of where they'd finish and how high they were and what kind of chance they had at home ice advantage. So I think, I don't know, Green Bay can possibly catch Team USA, but the question I have about Team USA, I don't think their 18s have played a lot of games. So I'm assuming that the U18 team is going to have a lot more games here in the second half, and I think they're the better of the two teams. They're the more experienced, obviously. So that'll be a challenge for Green Bay to get up there. But again, I don't know the idea of pacing yourself. I kind of get it from a veteran standpoint, but look at the Fighting Saints. They really haven't paced themselves. They've been going great guns pretty much all year, and they've put themselves in a nice spot in terms of a playoff spot.
One final thought before we take our next break as we look back to this most immediate game coming up for the Fighting Saints on Tuesday. We've seen a lot more of Gabriel Carrier than Logan Stein in this series. This is still a Waterloo team that hasn't decided on their number one goaltender, but it's interesting that the 2 games Stein has started, he hasn't even lasted the full first period. So I'd be interested to see if they feel that Carrier is the guy to start against the Fighting Saints from here on out, or if they give Stein another chance, because I don't think it's been particularly Stein's fault in those 2 games where he's been pulled, but Dubuque has gotten out to incredibly hot starts the 2 times that they've seen him in net.
Yeah, I think P.K. O'Hanley pretty much this year has gone with a regular rotation, and I don't think he's really deviated from that very often. It's Carrier and Stein, basically back and forth, and just the way those early games against Dubuque fell, it was Carrier's turn a little bit more. But Stein is the number 2 goalie in the USHL, number 2 in goals against average, number 2 in save percentage behind Eric Portillo in both of those categories. So I would have to imagine, these 2 starts where he's really struggled against the Fighting Saints, he's going to want to prove that he's a better goaltender than that. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see him tomorrow night, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him have an outstanding performance. He's a proud goaltender, and that's a proud franchise over there, and not just him, but I think a lot of the guys on that team want to perform well for him because of those 2 performances where he got pulled against Dubuque.
Yeah, I didn't think the last time the Fighting Saints went into Young Arena that we'd see a repeat of game number 1 between these 2 teams in Waterloo, but we saw the exact same goal discrepancy. Again, I'm going to say the same thing. I don't think we're going to see it a 3rd time in a row, but I didn't even think we'd see it a 2nd time. So it'll be interesting to see what the matchup looks like tomorrow. But like we said, I think advantage Fighting Saints.
Yeah, I do. I think I agree with that. But again, when you're talking about Waterloo, that's such a proud franchise, such a proud locker room, and they're in first place in the Western Conference by a lot for a reason. And they've performed well, and they've performed consistently against a lot of teams in the USHL all year. So, I do think it's a little bit of an advantage for the Fighting Saints, but that's a proud group, and I wouldn't be surprised if they came out and gave it everything they had and really pushed the Saints.
So Dubuque Waterloo tomorrow night, and then over the weekend, a home-and-home with the Green Bay Gamblers. 3 games this week for the Fighting Saints. That busy schedule continues for Dubuque. We'll take another break, and we'll look at a lot of busy schedules for teams this past weekend. Multiple 3-3s, and multiple teams winning all 3 games of their 3-3s around the USHL is next. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Molesky and Jim Leitner diving into the USHL weekend that was and going around the league to see how some teams fared. And you start out with two teams that played 3-3s this weekend, and that would be the Chicago Steel and the Omaha Lancers. The Sioux City Musketeers also played a 3-3. But we mentioned the Steel and the Lancers in the same breath because they do what few teams are able to do and win all three games of a 3-3, as Omaha was able to take down the Lincoln Stars twice and then dominate Des Moines on Sunday. And it was kind of a close weekend in every single game for the Chicago Steel, but they beat the Green Bay Gamblers 2-1 on Friday, 4-2 on Saturday, and then beat Muskegon 3-1 on Sunday. And it doesn't matter how you get it done, but if you're able to get 6 points in 3 days over the weekend, that's a very, very successful weekend for both teams.
It is, and I think the one thing that it is an impressive statistic to get 6 points in a 3-game weekend, and it's very, very difficult to do. But in both of their cases, they kind of benefited from the fact that third game they were also playing a team that was playing its third game in 3 days, so the playing surface was pretty even for both teams going into those 3-3s. The thing that I guess the series that impressed me the most, or the performance that impressed me the most, was Omaha, because they go and they win at Lincoln 5-4 on Friday, then they come back and they beat Lincoln 6-1 at home. We've talked about a lot. That's probably the best rivalry in the USHL, or probably the most heated rivalry in the USHL. And when you play a series like that, a home and home like that, you put so much energy into that. You put so much emotion into that. And then how do you come back less than 24 hours later and play? I mean, a Des Moines team Des Moines is a good team too. I mean, that's a team that's capable of beating Omaha as well. So to survive the series against Lincoln and then come out and perform as well as they did Sunday, really blew out Des Moines 7-1. That's really probably a little bit more impressive than Chicago.
And like you said, Des Moines was also in a 3-3, but 7-1 is lopsided no matter what team is playing and how many games they're playing. And if anything, it should be a little bit more even since both teams were playing a 3-3. But yeah, very impressive for Omaha. And I think Chicago, it's tough to say you expect a team to win all 3 games in the weekend in a 3-3, but with the Steel the way they're rolling, it was almost the expectation that they would be able to handle Green Bay and Muskegon, and it was a little tighter all weekend long than probably Chicago would have liked and people expected. That 2-1 win on Friday night, that was to start things off, so fatigue can't be blamed in any capacity there. But for the Steel, I think this might also be a good weekend for them because they're winning games in a way they haven't won much this season, which is actually winning a tight game instead of putting up 7 or 8 goals.
Exactly, and I think with Chicago, coming into this weekend, I think they've had a lot of success against Green Bay. Especially they played in that Frosty Cup down in Dallas right after the New Year, and they swept that rather convincingly. So to come back and get a home-and-home sweep against Green Bay, I think that's impressive. But I do think that this was, if I'm not mistaken, this was the first time they've beaten Muskegon.
Yeah.
They've had some struggles against Muskegon this year. So to come back and finish the 3-3 with a win over Muskegon, and I think that's impressive. And again, I think Chicago has been the best team in the USHL consistently all season. They've had only a couple real minor road bumps, and that's why they're number 1 overall in the USHL and why they've been flying. But again, that's an impressive weekend. And I think it makes it even more impressive is they have another 3-3 coming up this weekend. And so to play 6 games in the span of, 10 or 12 days is kind of crazy. But I think, when you go out and you have a 3-game sweep like this, it kind of builds a little bit margin for error for this weekend for the Steel.
Right, and if they're the Steel, I think the expectation you probably set is 2 out of 3 this weekend would be good. I mean, 5 out of 6 in any stretch of a season in the USHL is fantastic, and if they are able to do that with back-to-back 3-3s, that would be pretty impressive. Another team that had a pretty good weekend, I thought, was the Sioux City Musketeers. They had a 3-3, and they won 2 out of those 3 games, but it was a good weekend for them because they were able to beat Sioux Falls a couple times, and that's the team directly directly above them in the standings. And this is a team that in the Sioux City Musketeers that I think really had to make a statement that they weren't just going to keel over and confine themselves to the 8th seed, because for a while there it looked like Sioux Falls was just steadily climbing and Sioux City was going to drop down. But they showed a lot of heart this weekend, and to get 4 out of 6 points is a good step in the right direction.
No doubt about it, especially against the team you're directly chasing. And right now, Sioux Falls is still 3 points ahead of Sioux City. So if they don't have a sweep this weekend, they're almost buried. It'd be a lot more difficult for the Musketeers to get out of that basement if they didn't get a sweep this weekend. Now, granted, they did give up a point to Sioux Falls because they needed overtime to win that Saturday night game, but no doubt about it, they absolutely needed that. And if they were going to have any hope, really, I think they really needed that, so they didn't get buried by Sioux Falls.
And looking at those Western Conference standings, as we've already kind of broken it down, but we'll get you more specifics right now. Waterloo, as Jim mentioned, well ahead in the first spot. The lead got down to just 9, and I say just 9. That's still a ridiculous lead, but it got down to just 9 a couple weeks ago. It's now back up to 11, and even when teams like Fargo and Omaha have gone on some pretty good runs, Waterloo's just too consistent, and they built such a big lead to begin the season. It doesn't seem like they're going to be tracked down. We've got a really good battle for second place, though, right now, because in the last 3 weeks, we've had a new second-place team in the Western Conference each of the 3 weeks. Right now, it's Omaha. The weekend before, it was Tri-City. The weekend before, it was Fargo. 2, 3, and 4, Omaha, Fargo, Tri-City, separated by a total of 2 points. Fargo and Tri-City are tied at 45, Omaha at 47. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and those teams are kind of each battling to say, okay, we're the team that's going to contend with Waterloo this season, because right now I don't think there's a contender. We'll see if one of these separates themselves as the season goes on.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, earlier in the year, weren't Lincoln and Des Moines both up as high as second place?
Yep.
which is really crazy. I mean, it's going to be a fun race, but again, I think Waterloo's kind of running away with it, and then that battle for second and third, I think, is going to be really entertaining. And again, when you get a home ice or you get a first round bye with the top 2 seeds, it's a huge difference, and it takes a lot of pressure off you if you can get that 1 or 2 seed. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch all those heavyweights really punch and counterpunch the rest of the way through.
Yeah, you've got the battle for the bye in the Western Conference, and then you have a battle for a berth in the playoffs in the Western Conference as well, because 5, 6, 7, and 8, a total of 4 points separate them. Lincoln and Des Moines tied with 41 points. Des Moines in a precarious spot, though, because they hold the last playoff spot, but they've played 2 more games than the 2 teams below them. Sioux Falls, a credible run right now after being almost buried in the basement for the first full 2 months of the season. They're 1 point out of a playoff spot with 2 games in hand, and we just touched on Sioux City, only 3 points behind Sioux Falls, with, again, a couple games in hand on Des Moines, who holds that 6th seed right now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting if Sioux City wins those 2 games. They're tied with Des Moines. So, and again, you have to like the way Sioux City is trending after this weekend. Getting a sweep against Sioux Falls, but I think they ran out of steam a little bit against Fargo, and I'm sure Fargo was a little unhappy about getting swept at Waterloo.
Yeah.
So I do think I think Fargo's going to get that 2nd seed out west. Omaha's in that hunt too, but I shouldn't say anything. Keep my mouth shut. But
if you don't say anything, the show doesn't work.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Maybe just filter it a little bit more.
We can. Hopefully, these people are out there recording these and saving them for posterity. But I think Sioux City. You have to like the way they trended in beating Sioux Falls, but. Again, any given weekend out in the Western Conference, I do think it's the tougher of the 2 divisions, and who knows who's going to get out of that West.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be the deeper conference this year. Right now in the Eastern Conference, you have 2 elite teams: Chicago, number 1 spot, and Dubuque, the number 2 spot. And then you have a couple. I would say the rest of the Eastern Conference right now, especially after the slide Team USA has gone on, you have a lot of teams that are just okay right now. I mean, not many have been making serious moves. Team USA is in 3rd, Green Bay 4th, Muskegon 5th, Youngstown 6th, Cedar Rapids 7th. Between 4 and 7 in the Eastern Conference, there's a total of a 4-point gap. So it's going to be an interesting race because the points are so tight, but it's almost as if one team can string together 3 or 4 wins over the span of 2 weekends, they're going to shoot up a lot because all of these teams have just struggled mightily to find consistency.
Yeah, and again, I think Team USA is the team that's probably most equipped to turn things around because I do think the U18 team has not played very many games so far. So I'd have to be inclined to think that they're going to have a lot more. They're probably going to play more of the games in the second half here than the U17s, and the U18s are the better of the two teams, the more experienced of the two teams. So they're probably a little bit better equipped to go on a run like that. But again, it's wide open, and we really haven't seen any team really distinguish itself in that bottom tier. Mm-hmm. There's really, Green Bay's 6-3-1 its last 10. That's a nice run, but it's not anything that's really gaining a lot of separation. The other guys are right around that 500 mark, with the exception of Madison. But if you can go on a run, and you string together 3-4 weekends where you win every weekend, I think then you're putting yourself in a better spot.
Yeah, so the Fighting Saints comfortable, Chicago comfortable, everyone else could be some switching in the standings in the Eastern Conference based on who decides to go on a run and when that might happen. We'll keep this show moving, and on the other side of the break, one last look at Hockey for All. As we touched on it a little bit last week, we're going to continue talking about that for the entire month of February. And also we look at a milestone. We talked about milestones for the Fighting Saints. A milestone in the NHL is Alex Ovechkin just 2 goals away from 700. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report, finishing things up here this Monday night. Before we dive into some NHL talk, looking at Hockey for All for the second year in a row. And last year, the Fighting Saints rolled out the initiative of Hockey for All. It's something that's been pretty prevalent in the NHL for some time now. Different teams have different days or different games that they celebrate Hockey for Everyone, which is what it's referred to as the NHL. But in Dubuque, it's Hockey for All. And for the second year in a row, John Deere sponsoring the month of February to promote diversity and inclusion through the sport of hockey. And we had a great discussion with head coach Oliver David, Stan Reingens, the Dubuque Community School Superintendent, and the GM of John Deere Dubuque Works, Mark Dixon. And it was kind of nice to hear everyone's thoughts on why they're a part of this month, why John Deere decided to come back for a second year, what Oliver feels is important about it, and then what the school district is taking from it as well. Pretty cool discussion last week. It
was really cool district or conversation. And the one thing I've talked to Mark Dixon the last couple of years about this, and it's really interesting to hear how passionate he is about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And I guess I never really even thought about it until talking to him about how important it is to have that kind of diversity, and just how much it makes your business run so much more efficiently, so much better. And John Deere is a global company, so it's so important for John Deere to have so much inclusion and have so much diversity, because you're dealing with people all over the world. Mm-hmm. And so it really makes a lot of sense that John Deere is so heavily involved in it. And Stan Reingens talks about how the student body is probably the most diverse group of people in the whole community. Mm-hmm. So it makes a lot of sense from that standpoint. And it's an initiative that I think it just makes so much sense that you really encourage people to get involved, and you encourage diversity and inclusion. And it's been kind of a fun story to follow the last couple of years. And what I like about it is the Saints aren't singling out one particular group. They're not just going out and just trying to recruit one type of group. Mm-hmm. It's the name says it all, and it's as simple as it gets. Yep. Hockey for all. Doesn't matter who you are, what you are, anything, what label you have. There's no labels involved. You're invited, and I think that's the awesome part about this.
Yeah, the only label involved is hockey player. I mean, that's the only thing, and I think the initiative is to say that anyone can fall under that label of hockey player. And Oliver David was expressing, how important he thought it was for the team to be a part of it, and also the one thing that he mentioned was how it's nice that the Fighting Saints have been the ones pioneering this message in the USHL, and it was a great success year one. It's hopefully going to continue to grow, and I think that's something that Dubuque is hoping for, and the team as well, hoping that this is something that kind of stakes and resonates with the entire community and the team.
Yeah, and it's really fitting, and we look at it from up top in the press box or the stands, and we see a team, we enjoy watching them play, but that's a group of people, a very tight-knit group of people from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about guys from Sweden, from Canada. Last year it was Finland. We've had guys from Latvia, Belarus, all over the world, and they all come together, with the singular goal of winning hockey games and developing. So it really makes sense that the Fighting Saints are a group that is really championing this cause, and it's kind of cool too that the Fighting Saints are the team in the USHL that's really pushing this forward and really being the pioneers. And I think it really speaks to this organization, how forward thinking it is, and how how it really wants to not just be a hockey team, not just develop players, but develop people and develop communities. I think this is something that really is beneficial to the community and developing the community to be the best that it can be.
And so Hockey for All Month will continue, as it suggests, all month of February, and then Hockey for All Night will be the final night of February 29th, as Dubuque takes on Sioux Falls, and they'll wear special Hockey for All jerseys like they did last year, a different design that we'll be releasing soon on our social media pages, so stick around for that. And also those jerseys will be auctioned off, again with the proceeds benefiting the United Way of the greater Dubuque area, just like last year. Well, one final thought, because it could happen tonight, it could happen in a couple hours. Alex Ovechkin is 2 goals away from 700 in his NHL career, and I think we talked about this when we did a ranking way at the beginning of the year of best goal scorers all time, I believe, and Ovechkin continues every single goal he scores to cement himself as definitely one of the best goal scorers of all time. And before it's all said and done, you might not have to debate it at all, because he might break Wayne Gretzky's record. And I don't think Gretzky's going to be considered one of the greatest goal scorers of all time because he has that record. But if Obi's able to break that record and hold those numbers, there's going to be no debate that he is the greatest of all time. 2 away from 700, though. That's the first milestone he has to collect, and it could happen tonight.
It could, and I do think he's the best goal scorer. And the reason why I say that is, Wayne Gretzky's at 894, so Ovi's still 200 away. But Gretzky played in an era that was so much more wide open, and there really wasn't as much influence or impact on defensive structure or neutral zone traps or any of that stuff. And, Ovechkin has had to fight through all that, had to battle, teams game planning for him defensively. And, you look at all the guys that are ahead of him, Gretzky, Gordie Howe, Jaromir Jagr, Brett Hull, Marcel Dion, Phil Esposito, Mike Gartner. Those are all guys who played in eras that were a little bit more wide open than this, and not as much defensive structure. So I do think Ovechkin is going to be recognized as the greatest all time, and I would not be surprised if he caught and passed Gretzky.
Yeah, and when you look at the game tonight, the Capitals are at home, so it's always nice to see a big accomplishment like that happen on home ice. And the way Ovechkin's been scoring in the last 10 games, I think he has 3 hat tricks in the last 10 games, if I'm not mistaken. So 2 goals is like nothing for him, especially the way he can score almost at will on that power play. It would be pretty cool to see it happen tonight. They take on the Islanders at the Capital One Arena, and I think if you're Ovechkin, you're rooting for it to happen at home. Obviously, if you're all the fans, you're rooting for it to happen at home. And Ovechkin seems like the one of the few players that when all these milestones come up, in baseball, sometimes it takes 10, 20 games to get that milestone home run. He's kind of just cleaned through all the milestones. I think 500 was the only one he had trouble with to get to that 500th goal, but 700, I mean, he went from 690 to 698 in the blink of an eye. So it'll be interesting to see if he's able to get it done quickly or if has a little bit of a lull. But something tells me tonight might be the night.
Yeah, and that's a sign of a next level athlete that they can, they don't get stuck on a milestone. Mm-hmm. You see it all the time, guys who are, 1 goal away or 2 goals away from that milestone, and they start thinking about it, or they start being concerned about it, and he really hasn't. And what did you say? He was only 34 years old.
Yeah.
So there's still quite a few good years left in him. I would have to imagine there's probably at least 3 or 4 more years where he could get to that 50 goal level, and then boy, you're really talking about being in that conversation of passing Gretzky. And he's 34 now. Theoretically, he could easily play till he's 40. The way things are going now, and the way he takes care of himself, the way how tough he is, and how he battles through all the contact that he gets, it could very easily play until he's 30 or 40 years old.
Yeah, if he finishes this season with around 50 goals, which he's projected to, I think, finish closer to 55. But if he finishes around 50. Plays 5 more seasons, he would need to average about 36.5 goals per game. And that's a lot, but then you look at what he's put up consistently, and for him, that's well below his standards. So it's very much within reach, and it's one of those records that you talked about for so long of, okay, no one's coming close to that, especially in this era of hockey and how tough it is to score. So it's crazy to even think that there's a realistic possibility that Gretzky's record might fall. But boy, if that comes up, that's going to be the equivalent of the Bonds home run chase when he's chasing down Hank Aaron. I mean, it's going to be buzzing all over the hockey world if that happens. And hopefully in 4, 5, 6 years, we're talking about 891, 892 for Alex Ovechkin.
And he plays on a good team. He plays on a team with a lot of talent around him. And, that's sometimes you see aging stars where they're, really the only guy on their team, and it's hard for them to maintain that kind of scoring pace. But Washington has surrounded him with some really nice pieces, and that makes it a little bit easier because there's not as much pressure on you.
And they just locked up Nick Backstrom for the foreseeable future. TJ Oshie's going to be there for a long time. Same with Evgeny Kuznetsov and John Carlson. So they have that core that can be around Ovi for a long time. And you're also just not keeping those guys around for sentimental reasons either. They're still all premier players in the league, and the Capitals have been a premier organization for 10 plus years now. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Fighting Saints Report. Next weekend a little bit different. Next Monday I should say, after the weekend a little bit different. We're going to go over our USHL power rankings. It's been about a month and a half since we've done that, so seeing how much has changed since last time as we break down the USHL in our power rankings edition next week. Dubuque and Waterloo tomorrow night on Super Hits 106. Puck drop at 7:05 from the Young Arena.